This is the Analytics PM UX Weekly. This will be the last PM UX Weekly as we welcome Graham, our new designer, to the team. And a lot of the content of this meeting moves into other things with a dedicated designer on board. So looking back at last week's action items, I had a couple. One was to pull all the visualization designer post MVC bugs into their own epic, so that is now done, so that that epic can stay a little more focused on what new functionality we want to implement post MVC. It's still very eclectic and spread out, so there's more work to do there. Don't consider that actually done, other than I pulled bugs into one epic. I also created a new issue to add some feedback mechanisms, specifically the banner to the existing built-in product analytics dashboard. I assigned that and an issue to create a feedback prompt in the visualization designer flow into 16.8 to try to drive more interaction with customers and feedback. Still, I think there's a to-do for me to create a Qualtrics survey to add into that so that we can wrap folks into some quick feedback for them, a couple of questions, and then if they want to opt into an interview, they can. We don't have any latest prototyped or results of research, I don't think, to review. Just see if there are any questions about upcoming implementation from the team.
I had a point I just added late to your
sorry.
thing about the eccentricity of the visual designer post MVC epic. I think that's going to continue to happen in a number of different areas that we're like for every kind of little feature we add, every feature we add to our set. But this isn't directly UX related, but I think just process wise, I think it's beneficial to discuss is like would we like to kind of think of other ways we can kind of organize some of these epics beyond just post MVC, because that can in itself is quite nebulous, right? There's always going to be a post MVC. There's always going to be more MVCs. So just as an example, which has its own faults, like, we can, I know we have like the concept of like iterations and like releases, and we could maybe bucket by milestone, but then sometimes things slip and things like that. So I'm just curious if we'd like to try something different so that it make things easier for us in terms of how we organize issues going forward for things that we want to do in the future.
Yeah. I'd rather keep epics focused on specific problems to solve or opportunities that are more scoped down so that we know what closure or what success looks like. I can close it out and keep the items in it very focused. So that's probably what I'll move out of post MVC. I think the post MVC is a good place to stick cleanups, tech debt, things that as we develop the MVC or launch shortly thereafter, bugs that we know we want to address, we can put into that and keep that focused on a little bit of polish, but then future functionality or bugs 6 months on don't go there. They just go into the backlog of sorts and don't necessarily need to be associated with an epic. And we can kind of get away from the release epics that we've been using to date. That's my 2 cents.
I like that just because, like, if we take, for example, custom events or funnel analysis, for example, it's going to touch various different parts of, schema or visualization designer. How do we make it so the user can actually select custom events or add additional filters or what filters we support? So having them centered around the problem makes more sense. So,
but cool.
To be fair, the term post MVC is because naming is hard.
For sure. There's nothing wrong with it, but I just, what do we want to do with it going forward? It's like,
I do agree. The general point of it was because it was nebulous and I didn't know where to put anything.
It was necessary for sure.
Having using an alternative measure, it'd be great to, as James says, to have epics targeting user goals and user summaries, the things that we're trying to hit that meet a certain endpoint. I guess we can start having, rather than post MVC, just having some kind of maintenance per milestone epic or something. If we want to store all of our maintenance items that we're willing to tack on, which may make it a bit easier when it comes to the planning phase for new milestones, to say, here's a bunch, rather than having engineers come in, they're already in there, and you just pick out we can just pick out whatever ones you want to target, I guess.
Yeah. I think that makes sense because at some point, anything that belongs to a problem or a user story will have been organized into its own epic accordingly. And then what's left, we can just, yeah, when James and I meet for milestone planning, which I think is happening even today, we can just say, hey, we've got, 20% capacity. Let's just pick off, 10 weight, 15 weight of some of these issues that are paper cuts or polish or bug fixes and things like that, and just kind of slot them in. So
Makes
cool.
sense.
I like that. All right. Thanks.
All right, jumping back down. Any questions about upcoming implementation from the team?
I mean, my one is sort of tied into both of those questions. I'm still filling it out. I'll have it done by the end of my workday, so in a couple of hours I'll have these all written out. But it's regarding custom events and the initial MVC idea of having a way for the visualization designer to say, give me only a custom events with this name. So there's a UX topic there to figure out how we're going to add this equals style filter. Obviously, Cube and ClickHouse and everywhere else can have a variety of other filters that could be applied, but sticking it just to equals for now, and how we can factor that in. So that's going to be a big one. I don't know if we want to get it into next milestone. I'm not, because obviously that's going to be a blocker for front end. There's no back end involved in the MVC, so it is just two disciplines for now.
Yeah, I imagine that would be dependent on whether we have Graham focused on that or not, and what artifacts or what we decide to do, basically. But I think we'd want to, as soon as we have something, we want to move forward with it. But I don't want to just say like that. Let's put it into 16.7.
I think it's too early to stick it into 16.7 without some consideration. I started creating issues yesterday for kind of thinking further into custom dashboards of having filters and saving them as part of default views, or just filtering within the dashboard itself. So we can take this either of those ways of save the visualization with the filter applied, or filter within a visualization itself on a dashboard. I think that's our first decision of which of those to pick up, where we're going to have more impact for users.
From a engineering perspective, having the filter in the visualization designer is easier and quicker to implement. There is the concept of filtering within dashboard panels, and it's something that Optimize has picked up and started working, I believe, in some capacity, or at least shoving filters. But that is considerable more work to make that functional, not just from a development point of view, but from a user experience point of view to get that right.
Because this is starting to touch on them like the dashboard overrides, right? Or like the query overrides. I think that's the right name.
Yeah, whatever the name is, yeah.
Yeah, one of those is probably, I'm pretty confident it's one of those two. But yeah, making sure if you define a filter for like you track these events, and then making sure the dashboard filters, which I guess is topical of why if we want to put filters at the dashboard level, and so that's something we'll have to consider. But yeah, that might we might have a bit of an awkward phase where we put it in the visualization and then dashboard filters become a little bit more of a later addition. But then we have to make sure we communicate that behavior, especially as it changes, if it changes.
And we want to make sure that we're overly communicating that vision and how we're implementing, so that as teams convert visualizations, they can use filters where appropriate. That's going to be a fun UX problem to tackle, of which visualizations take which filters from a dashboard level, or if they can be applied at a visualization level, or as the data types start mixing together.
Conceptually, I think it is overall simpler to make, like, at least to start with, like dashboard filters will just all apply to visualizations. How it technically gets executed obviously is a different story, but just like from a user perspective, I think it would. And just tossing it out there, I don't know how valid this is, but like as we load a dashboard, we can see which visualizations already have filters at the visualization level, so that we can make it clear that when you do, like if we once we do address the topic of how will dashboard level filters look and function, if it detects that you have a visualization with the filter applied at a deeper level, it says anything you do here will or will not affect that differently, just in terms of like how we could surface that to the user as far as messaging is concerned.
Yeah.
But just that's literal spitballing. So yeah. If we're good with that topic, I did have the topic of page fragments, which I think it's literally us in that thread. So I don't want to take all that time up. So I'm happy to keep that at the end, but I wasn't sure if that's relevant for like review upcoming implementations since we're still kind of figuring out what the path forward is for that.
Looking at the rest of the agenda, it's a thank you for Think Big, Think Small reminder that this is the last session and where topics are going to go otherwise.
Yeah.
And then back to page fragments. So I
Okay.
think let's pick up page fragments.
Okay. So to hang on. To paraphrase my comment, or it's not going to be a summarization, I'm just going to repeat word for word at some point in my rambling. But basically, with page fragments, I would definitely say I have a stronger position about for built-in dashboards to kind of just be a little bit intentionally more like holistic or give an overview or maybe not as detailed. I if I'm looking at a list of top pages, I don't know that or page or path fragments makes sense to include it by default. From what I understand, the different options include like, do we collapse them together and then give it a way to expand that, which is considerably more complicated, or do we just list each line item with each page fragment? I think I understand from like the use case of the customer success, the release tool, why they would want that breakout. But at the same time, it's an application that doesn't have routing implemented, which I would consider, that is having not implemented the best practice, right? So I guess we can kind of, I don't know if this is a way for us to like revisit the personas we're trying to address, but like if I look at GitLab.com's dashboard, for example, and I see the index path listed 20 times, like it's the first, it's the thing that takes up the fold in that table. I would probably have questions around that, and we can like why is it showing up so many times, even though I can see the path fragments, right? If I'm querying top pages, I want like that is one page, and I want to see how that relates to the sign-in page or the merge request page or the issues page. So all that to say, and I knew this wasn't going to be a summarization, but all that to say is like, should path fragments be shown by default in a built-in dashboard? Because I think if we do believe that to be the case, then these options are very relevant. But if we don't, then like that kind of changes course based on what's already been proposed. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Do you want to, I mean, we could pivot this to a change top pages to a new visualization of page paths or top page paths.
I guess it's what the thing that's hinging here is on the term page and what that means to you and your application. In the case of many applications, it is going to be individual pages, or they're going to set up decent routing and actually have pseudo paths. But then you're going to have a smorgasbord of other products that aren't going to be doing that and are going to be using queries or fragments or some combination thereof. My decade of having to deal with WordPress tells me that's going to happen, or any PHP based application half the time. So what does top pages mean to you is the underlying problem. I
Right.
can see the argument that you're making, Dennis, and I can also see the other side of it. I'm kind of sort of on the fence, I'll be honest.
So if I may, I do want to hear what everyone else thinks. Like, to better summarize my position on it is that I think with the built-in dashboards, the mission has always been to like suggest sensible defaults and support best practices and things like that. So I don't, this is going to sound bad, but like if you haven't implemented routing and all you see is one page, which is an index on the dashboard, I think that should either implore you to build another dashboard to break it out by page fragment, or implement routing so that like it encourages better behavior or practices. I don't know. Because I think traditionally, like if you're using, and also it's like this other thing too, where it's like, where is this most relevant? this is for the browser SDK, but is Ruby or .NET or Node, are they going to care about page fragments at all? So, I mean, that's a whole other discussion that I kind of alluded to in that thread where it's like, well, maybe it's top views because pages aren't always going to be a pattern everywhere else, or top like area or something like that. So how would it look for that? Or is that just going to be like, is this just going to be a browser specific built-in dashboard? But I guess it also goes back to like, do we want to suggest best practices or not? And or are we trying to solve for as many use cases as possible? So yeah.
Good with us being opinionated about it, keeping it as top pages where pages really means a page. And we have, if you see duplication, we provide some sort of help of why do I see every page every time in the docs of, hey, you probably are, whatever the explanation is. Here's another widget that if you build a custom dashboard, will show you what you want. Here's another resource that might help you set it up so that you can use the existing dashboard. That works for
Yeah.
me. We did get some feedback from our internal folks about which option they preferred and some of the reasons why, if that helps color any of that. It's my 2 cents.
In terms of best practices, it's difficult to say what is a best practice because there is a camp in front-end engineering that I feel like is very pro using page fragments for everything. I can't say I'm part of it, but there is tons of libraries that default to that. And it, I don't think we should be telling our users like, oh, if you want to have a good experience with our dashboard, then you kind of need to change your application. So yeah.
I mean, that's only one option, right? I mean, I don't, the alternative I listed as the first alternative is just, customize the dashboard and then just show it by page fragments if that's what your application does. So I don't think we're like forcing anyone to change the behavior of their application. It's just, there's multiple ways to go around it.
Yeah, that does start making it a customizable dashboard. If we start, like, I'm imagining like you have like a tick box where it's like, or like you check it and it's like, oh, I want to display page fragments as well, or like show this table by page fragments, in which case it's starting to break the wall of like what is a built-in versus a customizable dashboard.
Yeah, I guess I'm looking at it also from a lens of like not only for myself, but like if we're building a dashboard to say like, hey, here's the top pages, but then and other product managers or Sid or whoever looks at it and it's like, well, why is the homepage listed 20 times? And like, how do I get an accurate count of that? Because maybe they are going to be all grouped together, or maybe they're not. Maybe 30 pages down, 30 folds down, you're going to see index more. And so it's like, how do I actually understand if this is the top page or not? So that's kind of.
It feels like this maybe could be part of our onboarding as like a question or drop down to be like, how is your page, or how does your application route, or like route pages, and we give like example URLs for you to like pick from. And it's like, do you use page fragments or do you use just like regular URLs? And then we could deliver a baked in dashboard based on what they what information the user provided. With something like the idea of like dashboard templates, where like create a audience dashboard, like that would then solve the problem of like in the future, a user picked the wrong option, but they actually want to display a audience dashboard that like has this, then they can like create a customizable dashboard quickly that has page fragments in it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. That's going to require. I believe that's where we should head. I feel like that's going to require a lot more work. So like I'm curious, like what we can do. I guess, yeah. Where do we go from here in terms of like what we would actually want to implement for this issue, and as far as what's default, and then like how do we want to handle page fragments in like a more minimal change.
Thinking about the other SDKs, in some ways query parameters become a much larger thing when you're doing backend routing. I mean, rather than using the browser SDK, if you decide that you're going to send all your routing info through like your Python Flask application, you're going to chuck in the tracker into that, but you've got no front end code. It's just plain HTML, and you're not bothering to put JavaScript in it for some strange reason. I don't know. The only time that backend, other than that, the only other time backend SDKs are going to have any effect. No, that is literally the only time. Because otherwise you're sending custom events. You're not sending page track events. So this is browser SDK dependent unless you're being a bit weird. The simplest option here, the most boring solution is to dump out the entire URL fragment, like page fragment, query params, the whole shebang, and not break it out and just count that as your top page, essentially. And then, if users are constantly hitting your page with a bunch of additional query parameters because they're coming in from Google and it's adding tracking details and all that sort of stuff, then, in some ways your marketing campaign is having an effect. It's just not ideal. Realistically, the long-term solution, as Dennis says, is to be able to start breaking this out and deep diving in and customizing it to your needs. Or eventually, being able to list out your top pages and then bundling them all up, like one of the options suggests, into the top page, and then seeing what sections of that page are most driven. And at that point, you're starting to go into funnel analysis too. So, yeah. I still stand at the simplest option and most boring solution that will solve everyone's problems while also not pleasing anyone particularly, would just be to dump out the full path URLs and have path fragments. Just go, that's it. And probably rename it to top views, because that is a more apt description of what we'd be producing than top pages.
So one thing that might help me understand it better is why is not showing path fragments an option? I think I asked that correctly.
Because Snowplow splits them out and separates it all. So
right,
when we get that data, it doesn't provide the all in sort of.
Yeah, it's just saying keep it the way that it is today. Don't show anything, or don't show the path fragment or any query parameters or anything.
No, I mean, so maybe it'll help with an example.
That's a good visual.
Like I know that's how Snowplow works, but like for example, if as I'm scrolling through, you see root a number of times, right? It was like in the top 30, you'll see it again in the 40s, 50s. You'll see search a number of times. So like, could we group it just by URL path? Like, I'm curious why that's not an option. As far as just top views or top pages, I understand like people want to see path fragments, but I'm just curious why this isn't an option in the current issue. I do believe at some point we should give them the ability to see path fragments, but I'm just curious, like, why haven't we evaluated just like grouping all the roots together to at least give a total aggregate count of like, this is your top pages. Does that make sense?
It does. The way Snowplow separates it, it takes into account the fragments and the query params and all that, which is why that's currently separated into individual records. So we would need to, we'd need to change the schema to only take into, no, actually we wouldn't. We'd need to do post-processing, or we would need to change the analytics collector itself. So the enrichment process groups them.
The URL path is a distinct. Maybe I need to take a look at the query again, but I thought page URL path is exactly this. So you can group by that dimension or attribute. Does that make sense? Like it will include the full URL as one of the columns in ClickHouse, but as far as I understood it, and as far as what I saw from the cube query, is that URL path is exactly identical as far as like seeing root. That's why we're seeing it like now as it is. So like, couldn't we group by after it queries by URL path so that we have a total aggregate count? And I know this is taking up a lot of time, so like maybe we can follow up with this later. But I just wanted to understand that. maybe that's what I was should have asked in the beginning.
The answer is possibly yes. We can probably distinct it. The only thing that's making me a bit is just because what you expect to be able to do, and like what you think in your head you'd be able to do with like a DB query, isn't
Mhm.
necessarily always what you can do when it comes to Cube. It's
Okay,
often a lot more finicky.
sure.
So my answer is yes, probably.
Yeah,
Probably, and it would take about as much effort as just chucking the full thing in the URL, like I suggested. So we can
right.
go either of those two routes.
Yeah,
We
I
can either
guess.
strip it down to literally just showing the / in those instances where fragments and query params are the direct routing process, and bring it back to bare bones, and grouping everything together.
Yeah.
Or we can chuck it all on the page. I'm happy with either or approach. Really.
Okay. Well,
So given where we're at, it's possible for us to build it that way. I think the question then becomes, what are users in the various scenarios expecting to see, whether it's views out of a Python app or a browser SDK, and how do those differentiate?
right.
And then we can understand, okay, given what's feasible with Cube, what's actually usable and solves for the customer problem. So I think where this sits in backlog is fine today. And Graham and I can pick it up and say, hey, more holistically, what is this going to look like with more applications and more data coming in for customers? What do we want the default to be? What do we want some of the options to be in
Mhm.
future world where you can copy a default dashboard and then start to modify it to fit your application if what we've already
Yeah,
provided doesn't give you what you need? Does that
yeah,
seem reasonable for now?
yeah, sure. Yeah, I think so. I think it's like just two different ways to go about it, but I think what you've outlined, James, is a good idea. I guess my concern, and I think it's made abundantly clear now, like if I list top 50 pages and like all of them are /search, like, yeah, we want the page fragments, but maybe we want to see what other pages are there, but we can continue that offline. So
Yeah, this goes
thanks
back to
for
maybe we
entertaining that.
start thinking about options of filtering out things in data where I don't care about search on my top pages. Give me everything that's not search. I need to be able to save visualization that looks like that. So
Well, that's the thing is like it's like these are invitations to dive deeper to build custom dashboards to kind of like, okay, I see it's all indexed. I see it's all /search. Like show me the breakdown by page fragment, which we can support, just maybe not by default. Or
yeah,
we do the inverse either way. But yeah,
yep,
I just want to make sure we cover that so that yeah, someone looks at it, someone instruments their application, we get them on board and they're like, all I see is like, yeah, I see all these page fragments, but I run, Google Tag Manager campaigns, and it's going to randomize 100 different query parameters at all given times, and I actually don't want to see all of them. But yeah, so all right, cool.
awesome. Well, I got to
Thanks,
bounce
everyone.
to another call. Thanks everyone, and see you all on the group chat. Thanks for coming to the last PM UX Weekly. Cheers.
Bye.